Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
Let's go back to Thursday afternoon. I was sitting there on a Zoom call.
I was sitting across the room, looking at my laptop, reading the news. I see the headline, Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested by the FBI. I can't tell Tom yet. I am freaking out. I'm reading... The NBC news report is being updated like every 4 seconds, basically. And I'm just going crazy. We've waited for this for so long.
I'm really surprised you didn't just interrupt and shout. But honestly, when you told me, it felt like a dream. I had just, in my mind, decided that she disappeared. You know, she was never going to be caught.
I know. Well, after spending the last few months talking about defunding the police... Today we're going to talk a little bit about Ghislaine and the charges against her. Before we get into that, though, there's a little phone call that I wanted to mention, just in case there's anything interesting about it, which was that on Tuesday, we heard the Queen and Donald Trump had a phone call, but they kind of disagreed about what they said to each other on this phone call. So the Queen said it was to mark Independence Day in America, which would be on Saturday. This was on Tuesday. And that it was part of a series of calls to world leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, Jacinda Ardern, etc., etc. Trump said that it was to wish her a belated happy birthday.
Which is very weird, because I don't know what birthday he's talking about. Like, her actual birthday was in April, so it's very belated.
The spokesman for the White House also said that they discussed close cooperation on defeating the virus and reopening global economies, and reaffirmed that the United States and United Kingdom stand together in our special relationship and will emerge from this trying time stronger than ever before.
But do you think they also talked about Trump firing US Attorney Jeffrey Berman, who was investigating Jeffrey Epstein?
It's a possibility. No one else was in the room where it happened. Sorry. Anyway, jump ahead to Thursday. Ghislaine Maxwell finally is tracked down in New Hampshire at her home, which she had bought in December and which was called Tucked Away, which is amazing. The FBI arrested her on criminal charges linked to Jeffrey Epstein's alleged sex trafficking operation. And I would say if you want like a more thorough breakdown of this case in relation to Jeffrey Epstein and stuff, we've recommended this podcast before, but True Anon did an amazing emergency episode on really all of this. And they just in general are like the experts on Epstein. But we're going to talk about this in relation to our boy Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
I thought we could run down the charges because I think it would just maybe be helpful for people to imagine the Queen and Prince Philip in Windsor Castle listening to what their favourite son, Andrew's former fling and friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, has been charged with.
And in fact, their former guest.
Indeed.
So she's been charged with 1 count of enticing a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. So that's Ghislaine being accused of convincing underage girls to travel.
Then you got 1 count of conspiracy to entice a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, which means she's accused of trying to persuade, induce, entice and coerce an underage victim to travel for sexual activity.
There's 1 count of conspiracy to transport a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, which means she's accused of working with Jeffrey Epstein and others to combine, conspire, confederate and agree together to transport an underage person for sexual activity.
After that, it goes on. We've got 1 count of transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. Ghislaine is accused of knowingly transporting an individual aged under 18 with the intent for that person to engage in sexual activity. And then finally, you've got 2 counts of perjury, where she is being accused of lying under oath in 2016, including when claiming she did not know about a scheme to recruit underage girls. We should point out that the more serious of these offences, the child sex trafficking and grooming charges, are alleged to have taken place between 1994 and 1997. So, I mean, to get into the nitty-gritty of it, this would be 2 years before Prince Andrew was introduced to Epstein by Ghislaine. But that leaves the other two, the perjury charges, would be the only two that relate to a period of time when Andrew knew Epstein. Although he knew Ghislaine before.
Yeah.
And also, Ghislaine has previously denied any involvement or knowledge of Epstein's alleged sexual misconduct.
We got another press conference. So acting US Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Audrey Strauss, said,
I'm not going to comment on anyone's status in this investigation, but I will say that we would welcome Prince Andrew coming in to talk with us. We would like to have the benefit of his statement. Our doors remain open, as we've previously said, and we would welcome him coming in and giving us an opportunity to hear his statement.
This is just stunning. Like, okay, on its face, the charges against Ghislaine are bad news for Andrew.
Yeah.
However you put it. The fact, though, that on top of that, you have his name being mentioned in a press conference about charges relating to a sex trafficking scheme. His name is the one that comes up, and she says Prince Andrew. It is just unbelievable. Like, that is mortifying. That should be the most
embarrassing,
painful
and
humiliation for all of the royal family that his name is coming up. However, Sky News reports that Andrew is bewildered by the claims that he has not offered to talk to prosecutors, which is also stunning. Now.
He's bewildered now.
He's feeling bewildered. He didn't feel at all bewildered when he was like clubbing and hanging out with a couple of 40-somethings and a 17-year-old girl, allegedly, in London in 2001, or all those times when he hung out with his buddy Jeffrey Epstein and that he was fucking surrounded by underage girls constantly. He didn't feel bewildered by any of that. Now, though.
And Andrew last met Ghislaine only in 2019, June 2019, and they had tea in Buckingham Palace, of all fucking places.
Like, this isn't someone who is a distant associate, someone that, an acquaintance really, someone that he doesn't really know. This is somebody who he was hanging out with, inviting to
his
Buckingham
mother's
Palace.
house.
Like, the seat of the monarchy as recently as last summer, and didn't feel any concerns about sharing that in his Newsnight interview, in which he, famously tried to downplay his association and friendship with Epstein by emphasizing his friendship with Ghislaine. And he kept saying that it was all because he was actually friends with Ghislaine and Epstein was just her plus one. She was, what he said, the key element in all this.
And her name comes up 13 times in that interview. If you combine the number of times Emily Maitlis says it with the number of times Andrew does.
And I think as well, we talk all the time about how it's the friendship with Epstein that is so embarrassing, this billionaire paedophile that he was a close friend with for many years. But even apart from Epstein, his friendship with Ghislaine is another major source of humiliation for him because of what she's being accused of now.
Yeah.
And has been for many years. There have been allegations about her. So that's almost, obviously it's connected with Epstein, but separately, this is another major source of shame for Andrew and by extension for the royal family.
On Saturday, The Telegraph had an interview with a friend of Ghislaine's called Laura Goldman. She's a controversial figure in her own right. But she claimed that Ghislaine had a fling with Andrew, and because of that, she'll never sell him out.
I don't think we'd heard that before. I think that's news.
Yeah.
I think maybe we'd suspected that maybe Andrew and Ghislaine had dated, but having that confirmed is another thing to keep in mind.
Well, Laura Goldman says the only way she can walk is if she gives someone up, but that definitely won't be Andrew. She is so appreciative that when she first came to New York, the Duke helped to launch her into high society. She always talks about what a true friend he is. She doesn't see any reason to speak about him to the authorities.
She also, I found this so funny, she suggested that Andrew's sense of entitlement may have blinded him to what was going on inside Epstein's depraved world, as the Telegraph puts it. And she says, Ghislaine's always told me that Andrew's kind of stupid and naive, and if there were girls in the house while he was there, he would have thought they were servants. All these people thinking he's evil are just wrong. He's just the kind of entitled person who sees everyone as a servant. that is evil. Like, on its own, that's evil.
I mean, this, like, stupidity defense is the one...
Compelling.
It's very compelling. It's the one that they should have run with, and it's one that they could possibly have got away with if it wasn't for Andrew's interview.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely would have believed that this guy is so entitled, arrogant, and stupid that he legitimately thought that all these girls were just there in, you know, gainful employment as maids or whatever.
I don't know if I would definitely have thought that, but I think it would be more convincing than whatever they're trying to try now, because he absolutely shot himself in the foot by talking so candidly in that interview. The Telegraph also published an exclusive photo, previously unseen photo, of Ghislaine and none other than fucking Kevin Spacey sitting in Buckingham Palace on the Queen and Prince Philip's thrones.
How could you have worse optics than two
Shocking.
accused abusers sitting on the thrones of the United Kingdom? Like,
this was in 2002, so this was before there were allegations made publicly about either of them. But at the same time, it doesn't matter, because now it just looks awful. We had heard about this before, though, because I remember the Sunday Times had a piece by their royal editor, Roy Anika, who had said she didn't have any photos, but she reported that Kevin Spacey had been given a tour of Buckingham Palace by Andrew. And she reported this in 2017, but it was relating to this visit in 2002. And at the time, she approached the palace about it, and she was told that Andrew had no recollection of giving this tour to Kevin Spacey and Ghislaine, and also told that the claims that they sat on the thrones was just speculation. And obviously now that's been proven totally false.
bullshit.
She wrote in the Times this weekend that a source close to the Queen had told her going anywhere near the thrones is a total no-no. If a member of staff did, there would be disciplinary action. The Queen would not have been amused. I mean, of course not. But just, I guess people get very up in arms about how disrespectful that is for the Queen. And if you're the kind of person who's saying, for example, that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been disrespecting the Queen, then I wonder what you have to say about this.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting, and Roy Anika pointed this out as well, that Andrew often resorts to this, I have no recollection. Like, I have no recollection of ever meeting Virginia Roberts Giuffre.
Yeah.
And that is really starting to wear thin now.
It just keeps piling up. Like, everything.
I don't really know what the royal family could do at this stage to salvage their reputation in regards to all this, because they have stood by Andrew for so long at this point that, you know, apart from making some kind of public statement about how he was being cut off and disowned, it's too late, I think. However, we did hear in the Telegraph that Andrew hasn't seen the Queen since Ghislaine was arrested, despite them living quite close to each other in Windsor.
So maybe the patience really has worn thin. And Jesus Christ, is this what it takes to wear the Queen's patience thin? Like, fucking hell.
It's funny, though, because all of this happened and immediately was just so breathtakingly embarrassing for the whole monarchy, the Queen, everyone. And it happened just after, like, kind of in the middle of when everybody was still going crazy about the details we learned earlier in the week about Meghan's legal case against Associated Newspapers, the publishers of the Mail on Sunday. So it put all that in perspective, I think.
Yeah.
Although we still got pieces in the weekend papers talking about how petulant Harry and Meghan were being with all of this. Which, talking about that with a straight face at this point when all this is going on is a little bit ridiculous, I think. But let's get into the legal drama.
So Meghan's lawyers have submitted new paperwork to support her claim against the publisher of the Mail on Sunday, which is Associated Newspapers. And Meghan is accusing them of breaching her privacy, copyright and data protection. Associated Newspapers wholly denies these allegations.
And these excerpts from these documents were published in the Daily Mail, but we're quoting from the Telegraph, which reports that the extraordinary submissions confirm the conflict between the palace and Meghan's approach to the press on record for the first time, stating the institution's policy of no comment to media stories was deployed without any discussion with or approval by the claimant, Meghan. Associated Newspapers is really trying to focus all this around the People magazine story, and that is really central to their case. So a lot of the details were about whether or not Meghan had authorised her friends to speak to people or reveal the existence of the letter that she wrote to her father, Thomas Markle, which she denies.
Her legal team have claimed that after she endured hundreds of thousands of inaccurate articles about her, she was left with tremendous emotional distress and damage to her mental health. So at the time of the article in 2019, papers state there was a shared frustration among her friends at Kensington Palace's no-comment response to media articles, which they say left everyone feeling silenced.
As a result, the legal team says 5 of Meghan's friends, who are only referred to as A, B, C, D and E in the paperwork, give details of Meghan's life to People magazine, mentioning her feelings and her letter that she wrote to her father without her knowledge. The Mail on Sunday subsequently printed parts of this letter given to them by Thomas Markle, but Meghan says she didn't know about the People article at all until Prince Harry told her, having heard from the Palace press team that it was going to come out on the day of publication, and only found out which friends had participated some considerable time later.
So the big kind of question is, why did her friends go and talk to the press without her knowledge? And the papers state that Meghan had been distressed by media reports, which left her friends rightly concerned for her welfare, specifically as she was pregnant, unprotected by the institution, and prohibited from defending herself.
It goes on. Her close friends, including those that had visited her in the UK and others who did not, were equally concerned for her mental health and wanted to help. However, it was mandated by the Kensington Palace communications team that all friends and family of the claimant should say no comment when approached by any media outlet, despite misinformation being provided to UK tabloids about the claimant. This shared frustration amongst the claimant's friend left everyone feeling silenced, as it appeared that other so-called sources were able to disseminate false statements about the claimant, while the people who knew her best were told that they needed to remain silent. The claimant believes that it's probably because of this reason, as well as concerns about the press intrusion by the UK tabloids, that a few friends chose to participate, and they did so anonymously. We've said before that we found it really hard to believe that Meghan's friends would talk to any member of the media without clearing it with her first.
Yeah.
But I wonder if this is to be believed. Were they trying to keep her out of it? And did they see this as a way of protecting her?
You know, is this a case where they knew if they asked they wouldn't get permission, so it was better to ask forgiveness instead? I just think it's such a careful way of writing about these kind of veiled comments as to like other sources who seem to be allowed to peddle misinformation, as Meghan describes it.
We should talk though a little bit about the kind of key line, for me anyway, in the papers, is when her lawyers say, as her friends had never seen her in this state before, they were rightly concerned for her welfare, specifically as she was pregnant, unprotected by the institution, and prohibited from defending herself.
It's a pretty, damning description of the situation, isn't it?
It's very explicit, I think. I don't think we've really heard, everybody has speculated that she felt unprotected, but to hear it in as close to her own words as we're going to get.
And set down in black and white.
It's really upsetting. It's come up a lot, in the last week, about examples of when the Palace Press Office has seen fit to issue comment instead of no comment, and a lot of those examples would seem really frivolous. We talked before about the baby Botox, which is kind of the most notorious example. And as well, back in 2011, when people were, I think the Daily Mail was suggesting that Kate had hair extensions, that someone from the press office released a statement saying that actually it was a scar, she doesn't get hair extensions. And if you listen to our Sophie and Edward discussion, we've got some pretty whopper examples of Palace statements relating to them too. Just to see that in contrast with the lack of statements in relation to Meghan is pretty stark.
There was another kind of layer to what was going on as well here, because they were talking about the level of wealth and privilege that the couple enjoyed in Britain. And Meghan's team said that their public funding was relatively nominal, with the costs of their wedding met by Prince Charles and the security paid only for the protection of the crowds. They said, this contribution of public funds towards crowd security was far outweighed by the tourism revenue of over £1 billion that was generated from the royal wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, which went directly into the public purse. But they haven't actually quoted a source for this £1 billion.
Yeah, and this ties into a sort of gripe that I think we both have with the idea that one of the big defences of the monarchy is how much they bring in tourism.
Yeah.
Even though many of the royal properties like Buckingham Palace rank pretty far down in the most popular tourist attractions in the UK. This frustrated me because I don't understand why they wouldn't give a source for this figure.
Yeah.
It sounds like a totally vague throwaway figure, like, let's say $1 billion. It also, to me, just from a little bit of research that we've done around it, doesn't seem accurate at all. Tourism numbers and tourism spending actually went down in 2018 compared to 2017, and then went up again in 2019. And there's a piece in Tortoise Media, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, where they did like an investigation into royal finances, and they quote an estimate that the royal family brought in £550 million for tourism last year, 2019. So if the idea is that Meghan and Harry alone brought in double that the year before, is a little bit hard to believe, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to see their source. That's all I want. If they can show me the numbers, then fine. Like, maybe a royal wedding can bring in that kind of money, but from this kind of evidence, it doesn't stack up to me yet.
And it really doesn't seem like what we know of Meghan. She is usually much better at providing receipts for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But the documents also detail the precise plans for bringing Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, to the UK for the wedding, including measuring for suits, paying for flights, and asking Meghan's American business manager, retained from her life as an actress, to arrange for him to stay in Los Angeles ahead of his flight and host him for dinner.
As well as that, we've been promised that future court submissions will share even more personal detail. The paperwork says the intention of the letter was to make Thomas Markle stop his actions. It was not an attempt at reconciliation. This will be amplified in the claimant's witness statement.
That's going to be a very interesting document. This is presumably going to be the closest Meghan gets to giving her own first-person account of what's happened.
Anyway, we'll be following this closely.
Absolutely.
Another bit of legal news. Byline Investigates has reported that Prince Harry is threatening to sue the Sun for illegally targeting Meghan. Harry claims that the Sun hired a private investigator to unlawfully obtain Meghan's social security number and private phone number in October of 2016, which was shortly after their relationship became public.
This PI has now turned whistleblower and told Byline Investigates he was hired to prepare a background report on Meghan, including address checks and vehicle and driver's license details.
So Harry's lawyers have issued a legal letter called a letter before action, which outlines the grievances of the potential claimant and requests that remedies are put in place to right the perceived wrongs.
In particular, they mentioned 2 articles from The Sun. So on the 31st of October 2016, spooky Halloween, the first story was headlined, Harry and the Actress's Wrist Bond, which implied that the couple wore identical blue, black and white bracelets as a token of their affection. And Byline Investigates understands that lawyers say that the text of this article contains high levels of private data. Then, on the following day, November the 1st, The Sun ran another story headlined, Smitten Harry bombarded Meghan with texts until he got date. Byline Investigates says, references to mobile phone activity is considered to be a classic hallmark of unlawful information gathering by lawyers involved in phone hacking litigation. Yikes. We should note that The Sun hasn't made any comment about Prince Harry's claims or the Byline Investigates report, but Byline note that in an unrelated case regarding the use of an unlawful private investigator, News UK has previously denied wrongdoing.
This isn't really that closely related, but I remember hearing Margot Robbie tell a story about how Prince Harry bombarded her with texts after they met.
Oh, is he a real pest on WhatsApp?
Good luck, buddy.
Pretty quick on the text, actually.
Unlike Margot.
Unlike me.
Unlike Margot, who
I'll
you
write
can
back
text.
4 days later.
Private Eye, the British magazine, also had a story this week about how ITV News is apparently working on a story about the Sun allegedly making payments to the partners of public officials for information about the royal family, which follows a Byline Investigate story last month that we advised you all to read but couldn't talk about.
Yeah.
And it says that Chris Shipp, the royal editor at ITV, has reportedly been approaching current and former staff at The Sun.
Apparently he is being helped by the former Sun royal correspondent Emily Andrews, but apparently only the most senior members of the editorial staff, who are well above Andrews' level, have access to this payment system. So we don't know how far it goes.
But I'm dying to find out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something a little bit lighter. We're going to take a little pause with levity before we get into the more heavy-duty stuff again.
Yeah.
But I just found this story so funny about Prince George. So this woman, her name is Julia Samuels. She was a close friend of Princess Diana's, and she was on a podcast this week, the How to Fail podcast with Elizabeth Day, and she talked about being godmother to Prince George. Princess Diana was godmother to her own son, and she told the podcast that she was following a tradition set by Diana decades earlier. And she said, "So I do to George what she did to us, which is to give impossible toys, which are really noisy, take a lot of making. I come in slightly tipped by the size of the present that William then has to spend days putting together, and then put all the machinery together, and it makes awful tooting noises and lights flashing and all of that. That makes me laugh. And it makes George laugh. It makes you and I laugh. Yeah, big time. So funny.
Really good. This is like classic great godmother tactics, I think.
Just so annoying. And like from what we know about George's personality already, the image of him sort of chasing you around with an incredibly noisy flashing toys.
Really good.
Now after that interlude,
let's get back into it. We've heard a good bit over the last week or so about how the royal household may take a financial hit from COVID-19, just like the rest of us. Royals, they're just like us.
Not quite though, because unlike the rest of us, the Queen and Charles and everyone else enjoy a funding system which will protect them from the worst of it, basically.
But surely they won't get a pay rise when we're going into a recession.
The Queen will receive a £3 million pay rise this year as a result of laws that guarantee her taxpayer-funded income never decreases. The combined earnings of the Queen and Prince Charles have more than doubled since the financial crisis of 2008. This is all outlined in a report by Tortoise Media. It's very good and very long and very dense, so if you are particularly interested in this, I would definitely recommend reading it, but we're just going to go through some of the highlights.
So in the decade leading up to 2019, which was, for the rest of the UK, a decade of austerity, royal earnings from the family's main sources of income rose from £63.5 million in 2008 to £142.4 million.
This is truly crazy money. And on top of that, like, those figures don't include their private investments and inheritances, which can be very substantial and are always hidden from the public.
While this was going on, the number of engagements undertaken by the Queen, Philip, Charles and Camilla dropped from 1,628 in 2010 to 1,040 last year. And in case we're going to say, well, Philip retired. I mean, he didn't do 600 engagements a year, but around half of this decrease is to do with the fact that he retired. There's still a decrease there.
They have a quote from David McClure, who's an expert on royal finances, and he's written a book about this. And he says, in terms of the public engagements, they seem to be costing more and doing less. Which is the fucking last thing I want to hear about these people. And
Yeah.
We knew it. And here it is confirmed. I thought we could talk a little bit, though, about how the royals make their money. This isn't going to be boring, I promise. There's so much opacity around how the royals make their money. And I think, you know, people have this way of talking about it like, oh, the Queen's just too high class. She hates talking about money. That's trashy. And people like that about her and see it as a kind of positive, even though that is just a way of protecting her and enabling this system of her gaining immense amounts of wealth without public scrutiny. So here's some scrutiny. And here are the main sources of income. So we've got 6. Number 1, the one most people know about, the sovereign grant, which is the taxpayer-funded annual payment to the Queen that comes from you and me. This reached 82.8 million in the year 2018 to 19, and it goes to fund her staff, property maintenance, and her official travel. Of that sum, about £33 million was allocated specifically to refurbish Buckingham Palace as part of a 10-year programme that reaches £369 million.
But that's not all, by a long shot. There is also the royal collection. So the Queen earns an additional revenue. So she got, in 2018-19, an extra £17.8 million from selling tickets to Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, as well as any other functions that she puts on.
Then we've got number 3, the Duchy of Lancaster. This is the Queen's private estate, which is held on trust to provide her with an annual income. Last year, the Duchy generated about £21 million in profits, and this is what she uses to fund some of the more minor royals, including this fuck-up Prince Andrew, as well as the upkeep of the private properties such as Balmoral.
There's also the Duchy of Cornwall, which is a £1 billion real estate conglomerate. So Charles is entitled to the duchy's profits but has no access to the capital. And in 2020, it handed £22 million to Charles, who uses the money for official costs and also personal outlays, including the employment of his 116 full-time staff and also to fund his sons.
Also worth noting is this shocking story that we learned this week in the Telegraph about these absolutely archaic rules, which means that Charles also inherits the property and possessions of anyone who dies in Cornwall without leaving a will or without having any surviving relatives. And you might think, oh, that's probably not very much. But actually, in the year 2019 to 20, Charles collected more than £1 million.
$1 million.
This is the equivalent of him pulling the rings off fingers. This is him tromping through a battleground, stealing people's boots. It's fucking disgusting. It's grisly as hell. And when I saw this, I thought, this cannot be true in 2020.
Okay, but anyway, back to number 5, sources of income. Security. This is paid for out of the Home Office and police budgets. We talk about this a lot in relation to Prince Andrew possibly using his security, blah, blah, blah. This, again, is also very opaque and nobody really knows how much they get from it, but the total cost could be up to £100 million a year.
And then the 6th source of income is private wealth. So, as David McClure points out, there are lots of trusts knocking around. The Queen Mother is understood to have left a multi-million-pound fortune when she died in 2002. Princess Diana left a sizable inheritance to her sons, Will and Harry. Each of the royals has a financial advisor who handle all their personal investments, and the Sunday Times Rich List estimates that the Queen herself is worth an estimated £350 million.
This is all just totally wild. And, I think, if you're interested in this, it's definitely worth reading about the reforms that were brought in 2011. So just to give, a really quick recap of them. They were brought in by George Osborne, who was the Chancellor at the time, and they have led to the Queen's sovereign grant rising from £31 million in 2013 to £86 million this year. And when you add in the ticket sales from Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, her official income for 2018 to 19 hit £100 million for the first time. They had a quote from a former senior civil servant talking about the sovereign grant policy, and it was presented as a reform and a way of being more in line with the austerity measures. And this former senior civil servant says, "It was a trick. A political piece of presentation to try and tell the British public that the royal family didn't cost the nation anything. Osborne, in complicity with the palace, was trying to pull a fast one."
This is more fucking bullshit that makes me super angry. So what they're doing is they're linking the Queen's income to property prices, which go up and up and up all the fucking time. And, what has been proven is it's absolutely not in line with inflation, and it's not in line with what's going on in the rest of the country. But it was, like you said, slipped through kind of on the sly, packaged up as something else, and now look, she's fucking £100 million a year.
And in 2016, the royal trustees, which included Theresa May at the time, decided to increase the Queen's share of the Crown Estate profits. So she was getting 15% and they decided to bump it up to 25%, which meant that she got the £369 million we mentioned earlier allocated to fund the refurbishment of Buckingham Palace, despite a petition that was signed by 150,000 people who were telling the Queen to fucking pay for it herself because there was a fucking housing crisis going on and the NHS cuts were going on and all sorts of other austerity measures were going on.
And this is the thing, like, the background that this is all set against is cuts everywhere that have affected so many people's lives, and people have died because of austerity cuts. And she's got extra money to, put the gold back on her windows? Fuck that.
And on top of that, so this year, the Queen's public income, £100 million, in case you forgot, has risen so much that the Prime Minister is now legally able to reduce the size of her annual grant. But, can you guess? He's not going to do it. Boris Johnson has declined to do that.
Well, he's still trying to get back in her good books, presumably, after he, broke all the rules and started talking about their private conversations and got on her bad side within, hours of becoming Prime Minister.
As well as the Queen, then, we've got Prince Charles, who is £4.4 million a year richer than he was in 2009.
And that's not £4.4 million richer. That's £4.4 million a year richer.
Thanks to soaring profits at the Duchy of Cornwall, which is exempt from corporation tax. He has nearly quadrupled what he spends on Kate and Will and Harry and Meghan, from 1.7 million in 2009 to 8.2 million last year.
You can say that he's classy all you want, but he's not above taking that fucking Waitrose money, is he?
And looking further ahead, according to Tortoise, the royals are only going to get wealthier. King Charles has the capacity to earn up to £500 million from offshore wind farms built on the Crown's land. And Clarence House had promised that these earnings from the wind farms would be ring-fenced because of Charles' personal interest in renewable energy. But there's no evidence that this promise has been acted upon, and Clarence House declined to comment.
I think that, the only way this would be worse if it was fracking or something to do with energy. At least I suppose it's a renewable energy, but I just don't want anyone to ever forget that he's creeping into people's deathbeds and stealing all the money out of their pockets.
They also point out, because people were talking a little bit about this idea that Charles is supporting Harry and Meghan, and when Harry and Meghan left the royal family as working royals, Harry gave up the share of £5 million that's allocated yearly to him and William to support their official duties, but he kept a personal allowance. We've heard a few times, and they mention it in this piece, that Prince Charles will continue to offer private financial support. However, private can mean a number of things.
Yeah, so is this private money from private investments, or is it money that he gets through the Duchy of Cornwall? Which, it's not the same thing. It's, not his own money. It's still money that he shouldn't be getting, as far as I'm concerned.
But anyway, I would recommend that you read that piece on tortoisemedia.com if you are interested in learning any more.
As if your blood couldn't boil anymore. What's the Queen doing now? She's planning a fucking holiday.
We know usually the Queen goes to Balmoral every summer. She loves her summers in Balmoral. And unfortunately this year it looked like maybe she wasn't going to be able to go, but she is just going a little bit later than normal. She's planning to head to Balmoral with Prince Philip by helicopter on the 1st of August, once restrictions on the over 70s are lifted. And to make up for this little delay, she's going to spend 3 months there. She's going to take her full holiday just a month later than usual.
Well, I'm very jealous of her because, that lovely bit on holiday where you arrive and the place is so beautiful and lovely, and you drop your bags and you just wander out into the garden, don't you? Isn't that lovely?
I don't think it'll be that lovely this year, Tom.
Oh no, that's right, because apparently employees at Balmoral Castle have had to ask visitors to stop shitting on the castle grounds. I mean, I kind of love these people who are going to Balmoral, I assume expressly to shit on the Queen.
But they're not using biodegradable wipes. And Balmoral Castle has been posting pictures of the used wipes on Facebook. So disgusting.
And I'm sorry, but that is way more embarrassing than anything at Sussex Royal ever fucking did.
Do you want to read the caption?
Oh, it's so bizarre. Okay, so the caption was, "If you've got to go, you've got to go." However, with public toilets closed, we are seeing increasing quantities of human waste on the estate. If you need to pee, please do so at least 30 metres from lochs or streams. If you need to defecate, do so as far away as possible from buildings, from open water or rivers and streams, and from any farm animals.
No.
Bury feces in a shallow hole and replace the turf. Use biodegradable toilet paper rather than wipes.
Oh, this is too ridiculous. Pity the poor fucking groundskeeper who has to clear up all this shit before the Queen and Prince Philip arrive.
Well, now we've got through all that shit, should we go on to quote of the week?
Yes. Our quote of the week this week comes from Prince Harry, who surprised attendees of the virtual Diana Awards on Wednesday, what would have been Diana's 59th birthday, with a video message. And, like, just as an aside, I've got to point out, like, what is going on with this terrible video quality. Like, I do not believe that Harry and Meghan don't have access to better cameras. Even an iPhone can do better than this. I don't understand why we keep seeing these terrible quality videos of the royals. But anyway, the Diana Award highlights youth in the UK who continue Princess Diana's charitable legacy.
So Harry said,
"I know that my mother has been an inspiration to many of you, and I can assure you, she would have been fighting your corner. Like many of you, she never took the easy route, or the popular one, or the comfortable one. But she stood for something, and she stood up for people who needed it. Right now, we are seeing situations around the world where division, isolation, and anger are dominating, as pain and trauma come to the surface. But I see the greatest hope in people like you, and am confident about the world's future and its ability to heal, because it is in your hands."
I found that quite emotional.
yeah.
That was a nice moving little bit. And then he goes on,
"My wife said recently that our generation and the ones before us haven't done enough to right the wrongs of the past. I too am sorry. Sorry that we haven't got the world to the place that you deserve it to be. Institutional racism has no place in our societies, yet it is still endemic. Unconscious bias must be acknowledged without blame to create a better world for all of you. I want you to know that we are committed to being part of the solution and to being part of the change that you are all leading. Now is the time, and we know that you can do it."
This was a good speech, and I think that the royals could really take note from it, because I don't feel like he has overstepped the mark in the kind of the royal family's eyes. Like, I don't think he, like, has gone, in massive quotation marks, political with this.
I mean, I do think it would have been better if he had squeezed in the words Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is I think he could have and should have gone further with it.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is a good, maybe entry-level royal speech that the others could take note of.
And it's mad to me because, you know, he talked about unconscious bias in that Vogue interview he did with Jane Goodall last September and got all that stick for it. But, like, you know, I kept seeing people saying, like, remember when Harry used to be fun? And it's just like, who wants, like, a 36-year-old who's just, like, on the piss all the time? Like, you want somebody to grow up and be able to make a mature and articulate speech like this as a representative of your country. I do think, though, he, like you say, should have gone further and also should have taken some time for a bit of self-examination, because that kind of self-assessment and acknowledging your mistakes and assessing your blind spots is a crucial step in the process of dismantling this kind of institutional racism, as is acknowledging the role of institutions like the monarchy in perpetuating racism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he really should have gone into that, in my opinion. I mean, when he doesn't mention it, it makes me feel like he's not looking at that side of things. You know, maybe he is in private, but it's not good enough just to look at it in private. He needs to say it. He needs to make it very clear that that's something that he is aware of.
Especially because, you know, this is one of the few times where you and I and the Daily Mail columnists have been saying the same thing, that he needs to address his mistakes in the past. And I say that as somebody who is not perfect, and, you know, we've all made mistakes. But when Harry has made very public racist mistakes in the past, he needs to own up to those in a better way than he did at the time. Because I went back and was looking at the apologies he made for both the Nazi costume and when he used the racist Asian slurs. And I thought if we just went through them now to remind people of how poorly he handled both of those incidents. And obviously he was much younger and it was many years ago, but I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, so his apology for wearing the Nazi costume was, "I am very sorry if I have caused any offence or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologise." So this is like a classic bad apology 101, sorry if. Sorry if you were offended. Sorry if I offended anyone. And it really shifts the blame onto the people who have been offended by what he's done or what he said. And that's not an apology. That's just shifting the blame, masquerading as an apology.
It carries this implication that it's not him that has done anything wrong or had a problem. It's you, because you have chosen to be offended by this. A year later, then, the palace released a statement about Harry's use of the racist Asian slurs in the military. And it said, "Prince Harry fully understands how offensive this term can be and is extremely sorry for any offence his words might cause. However, on this occasion 3 years ago, Prince Harry used the term without any malice and as a nickname about a highly popular member of his platoon. There is no question that Prince Harry was in any way seeking to insult his friend." Which, again, you have to look at the difference between intention and impact. You know, reading this statement, he's not even trying to understand that. He is just saying, again, sorry if you were offended.
Yeah.
That wasn't my intention, and it's on you that you took it that way.
And, I mean, maybe this wasn't within his power, but, like, it's not even him saying it. It's like a passive thing where somebody else is talking about his feelings or his interpretation of what's happened. And it's absolutely centering Harry rather than the person who was the subject of these slurs.
It's an ongoing process, and we all continue to learn, but I would like to see Harry speak about this again.
Yeah, because he's shown that he is on some kind of positive trajectory with this, because, you know, what he said this week is better than this, and that's good, and that should be not applauded, that's a bit strong, but, you know, that should be encouraged.
Yeah. Let's proceed to Fit for a Queen.
Who's it this week?
It's Kate. Kate was so wrecked after her outings last week that she was back on Zoom again. But she looked lovely. She did a Zoom call with Will for Canada Day and did her signature flag dressing with a red and white boucle Alexander McQueen dress. Gorgeous dress. Crew neck, short sleeve was all we could see, but it looked lovely. And to me was 1,000 times better than the outfit she wore when she was actually in Canada on Canada Day in 2011, which you may remember as that white Reese dress with the little ruffle on it, and notoriously the red fascinator with a big fucking maple leaf on it.
Yeah.
It was just terrible.
Her hair was also different.
Yeah, she's a few times we've seen her now with the straight hair, and I thought maybe it'd be worth just talking about. Like, it's very different from sort of signature Kate Middleton hair, the big sausage curls or the big bouncy blow dry. This is much straighter. I think it's a lot more low maintenance looking. I also think it's maybe a bit younger and fresher, or it makes her look a bit younger and fresher. It's also, I think, pretty endearing because it's more relatable. It has that kind of DIY quality to it. So that is...
It doesn't look like there's been a team involved necessarily.
Yeah.
In the same way. Because, like, we've been reading or rereading The Royal We and The Heir Affair in advance of a book club, and in that they talk a lot about Bex's Duchess costume, which involves like so much adding extensions into the hair and getting the volume and all of that. And that's obviously, you know, so much to do with Kate's kind of Duchess costume herself.
Yeah. I do wonder, because hairdressers reopened this weekend in the UK. I just got my hair cut. And I was wondering, as I was sitting in the chair, whether we're going to see Kate also get new hair sometime
What's she
soon.
going to go for?
Could we get the royal bob?
Well, she would be leading by example there, because the bob is meant to be the most hygienic answer to post-COVID hair.
That's not true, but let's move on to first in line. We've got two different ones here, and let's go with the more serious one first.
I think our first in line should go to Audrey Strauss for the comment she made about Andrew.
Yeah, that she is keeping up the fight. She's not letting him slither away, as they said about Ghislaine.
Yeah.
That we were worried that after Jeffrey Berman was fired, what would happen? Would they be as aggressive in their pursuit of Prince Andrew? It looks like they will be. So that's great news. My first in line, however, is Leslie Manville, one of my favourite actresses, who was announced this week will be playing Princess Margaret in the fifth and final season of The Crown on Netflix, which is just amazing news.
It did make me annoyed that there's only been one season of her, because
I know.
she's just so incredible, Leslie Manville, and I'm so excited to see what she was going to do with the Princess Margaret role.
There's not that much of an age difference between her and Helena Bonham Carter, which is kind of interesting. I think it's like 10 years or something, as opposed to Olivia Colman and Imelda Staunton. There's like 20 years there. But I don't care, because I think she is incredible and I cannot wait to see her in this. I would recommend that if you are not familiar with Leslie Manville, I mean, she's amazing in Phantom Thread. That is one of the best movies ever. But also for a more like light comedy, she was in this brilliant BBC comedy called Mum.
It's honestly a perfect show.
It's just so sweet and made me cry so much and also laugh so much. So I would recommend getting acquainted with her in that.
Well, we know what's coming up next week. We don't need to wonder about that. We've got our Air Affair book club episode.
Yeah, I keep seeing people have their copies already, so it looks like we're good to go. With next week's episode, we will be talking about Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan's The Air Affair, the sequel to The Royal We, which I'm rereading at the moment. So if you haven't read it, you'd probably have time to read the two of them before next week. We'll also be talking about whatever the hell the rest of the royals are up to before we get into the book. So we hope you'll come back and join us. But in the meantime, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at AirheadsPod and on Facebook at Airheads, or you can send us an email, getting more emails, which we're delighted about, at airheadspod@gmail.com.
And if you like this episode, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts and tell a friend.
And we hope you have a great week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Don't pick a fight with me. You certainly won't come out alive. I'll go right through you and it'll be you who ends up on the floor. Understood?